Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Valvoline and Sparesbox. Don't forget BCW5 on checkout. Today we are back on the IS600 and we're going to be doing a few different tasks. Namely, we're going to be repairing the rear subframe. There's actually a crack that's developed in that. We're also going to be fitting a new rear diff with an upgraded Cusco RS 1.5-way LSD, which we're going to be installing today in the diff before we fit it. And we're also going to be putting some Serial 9 solid rear bushes into the subframe and into the diff. So it's going to be a little bit tech heavy on assembling diffs and stuff today. Hopefully I don't tell you guys the wrong thing. Let's get into it. Oh, that's heavy too. Oh, I'm old. So this is the rear diff we're going to be fitting today. As you've just seen, we've knocked the side drive flanges or stub shafts out of the diff. The reason you do that is because there's no way you can actually pull the LSD center out or fit the new one in with those in there, so they have to come out before you can actually pull anything apart. This particular diff is actually a JZX90 factory manual diff, so it's a 3.9 ratio. What we currently have in the car is a 4.3, and the ratios don't really match up with the T56 properly, so I think the 3.9 is actually going to make it a much nicer diff, and it'll make the car a lot nicer to drive and be better at drifting and in grip. So we've got the rear cover off, and before we pull the diff apart, I want to actually put some bearing blue on the face of the gears so we can actually have a look at the way the pinion and the crown wheel interact at the moment. This was out of a running car, so there should be no issues. So basically the plan will be, if this all works and the marks look all right, we're actually going to pull the diff out, swap the ring gear or the crown wheel onto the new diff center, reassemble it. This already has new bearings on it. We have had new bearings fitted to this so that we're not having to pull the bearings off of this center or muck around like that. So all things going well, we're basically just going to reassemble it back in, and then we'll clean the gear and re-blue it, and then we can run it through and have a look again. But this basically tells you where the gear is going to be sitting if it's in the right spot. What we're actually going to do is take a photo of it. Once we do the mark and check, we'll take a photo of it. Then once we put this center in, we'll do the same thing again and compare those two photos. And as long as it looks pretty good, we're just going to run it. There should really be no reason to have to reshim it left to right, and you can't actually change the pinion height with the diff position. So the only way you can change the pinion height is if you change the crush tube on the pinion. While I do have all that stuff, I'm really hoping we don't have to get into the front end of the diff because it's just way more effort, and I hope we don't have to do it because there shouldn't really be a reason to. So going to blue this thing up now, give it a bit of a spin, have a look at the mark and go from there. Just put it on the face of the crown wheel and basically spun it up before we've actually touched anything. So just want to have a look at the current pattern, having a bit of a Google and having a look at what's on there. It doesn't look too bad. So what we're actually going to do is continue to strip the diff apart now, pull the center with the crown wheel out. After we pull the caps out, there's also a couple of shims in there, I believe, to set the offset left to right. So we're going to take those out. And we're also going to lay them all out as they come out of the diff. So obviously the left side of the diff will sit on the left, the right side will sit on the right. Then we'll strip the ring gear off of the diff center, and then that'll allow us to basically start assembling our new Cusco center into the diff. This Cusco center has already had some brand new bearings pressed onto the side of it, so we don't have to go mucking around pressing bearings on. I don't have a press here, so it does make it a bit challenging to try and put some of this stuff together. It's probably something we should add to our arsenal of tools, but to this point we don't really have anywhere to put it, so it could just be more issue than it's worth. But yeah, the local bearing shop actually pressed them on for us for $10, so it's pretty cheap and easy. So, and it's their problem when they do it wrong, but they didn't do it wrong, so we'll be sweet. Yep, let's whip this center out and keep on going. This is our Cusco RS center. So these centers are really good because you can actually choose between 1.5 and 2-way locking. So basically what that means is in a 2-way configuration, it locks evenly between acceleration and deceleration. So really good for a drift car, but not so good for circuit because on like lift off decel, you can lock wheels and all sorts of stuff. But you can also set it for a 1.5-way, which is the way we're going to do it today. These come pre-assembled from Cusco as a 1.5. You can also option it as a 2-way, but it's actually the same diff, just assembled differently at the factory. So they're pretty nice bit of gear. It's all really nicely machined stuff. Nothing's cast. It's all, from what I can tell, it's all billet. So yeah, they come pre-assembled. They also come pre-lubed too. So as they are assembled, they're filled with oil. They're not just stripped clean. So when you do go to assemble them, obviously you need to put oil in the diff. It's pretty logical. But it is nice because when you first drive them, the actual clutch packs are already lubricated. So you're not going to do any damage by driving it the first 500 meters and it being a dry clutch. The one thing worth mentioning is the running procedure for these. Typically it's about half an hour of figure eights. I'm not going to be doing that today because I don't have anywhere to do it. But next time we go to the track in the morning, I'll just do that in the car park quickly before we do any track activities. It does definitely prolong the life of your center, so I do highly recommend doing it. We've now got it to the point where we've assembled the center into the housing, and we've actually torqued all of the bolts to 95 Newton meters as per the internet, so hopefully the internet's right. I've just re-blued the gear again. It looks almost but exactly the same, so I'm pretty happy with that. Pretty much for now the center's done. It is worth mentioning though, if you were going to change ratios or put a different gear set into this housing, the process would be a lot more complicated. There is a crush tube that actually goes on the pinion, so you need a new crush tube. I'd also recommend to do new pinion bearings, obviously the new bearings that we've replaced here as well, and a full seal kit. I do have some side seals, but these things actually look pretty well brand new anyway, so I'm not that keen to just change stuff for no reason. But what I will do is add those side seals to my spare kit for when we go to the track, so that if we do have to change them, it's a nice easy swap over. So pretty much the only thing left to do before we put this thing back in the car is, or put this into the car, is knock our stub shafts in and put our diff cover on. But because we've got the oversized diff cover already in the IS600, we're not going to fit the standard JZX100 cover to it. So now we're going to go ripping the rear end apart, and then we'll start repairing the subframe and swap our cover over. Then we can fill it with oil, because I'm going to bench fill this one as well, because we've got the pump. This thing needs to be overfilled. So what I normally do is actually basically fill this thing to the top, then connect the pump and the cooler to it. Then while the ignition's on or while the engine's running, actually pull the fill plug out of the side of the diff, and then that will ensure that we've got the correct level of fluid both in the diff and in the cooler. So if you just go filling this to the correct level with the cooler not operational, obviously as soon as you then pull some oil out of it with the cooler, you're going to run it low, and what can happen is you actually starve the pinion of oil. So that's not really a situation that we want to be in. So I much prefer to bench fill this and overfill it, then we can correct the level once it's in the car and running again. So we're going to go up with this thing. We're also going to disconnect the battery before we go up, because we are going to do some welding on the car. So it's good practice to just drop the battery off. We do have a welding saver, but for you guys at home, for the most part, won't have one of them. So we're just going to disconnect the battery and get the weld on. These rear diff bush mounts can be pretty hard to actually get out of the subframe if you're just trying to bash them out with a hammer. But I find it's really easy to actually just cut the center out with a recipro saw, and then actually split the outer shell in a couple of spots with a saw as well, and then you can actually just tap them out. And the second one, the saw actually pushed it out a little bit. So as soon as you basically break the tension on the outer diameter of the shell, it loses all the tension in the frame and just pushes out with it, either a hammer or the saw actually push one of them out, like I mentioned. So heaps easier than either trying to cut it by hand with a hacksaw or flogging it out with a hammer and then potentially bending your subframe. So yeah, it's just way easier to do it that way. Like this literally took us 5 minutes, and I know people have spent half a day trying to replace diff bushes and stuff at home before. So a battery powered recipro is well worth the spend when this sort of stuff comes into play. Well, we've got all of our bracings back in the subframe now. We've got our round bar welded in from the backside, which we actually bent to follow the contour of the subframe. Got that all in, then we ground all of the paint off the subframe. It's really important when you are welding to steel to make sure that you remove any surface coating that you've got there, whether be it paint, powder coat or mill scale. Any of those things can inhibit the weld and reduce penetration. So we've got all of that off and we've got everything welded in. We've also cut and welded in our gusset, which basically ties the bush mounting area together with the round bar that we've put in. So hopefully that'll brace it up heaps more than having the subframe when we cut it up. It was trimmed previously to clear the oil line, but I did actually trim way more out than I needed. So we've pretty much added most of the material back in there. We may need to dress up some of the round bar a little bit just to give it a little bit more clearance, but I don't think it's going to be a massive issue. So yeah, we've got it all back in. It's all looking pretty good. So all we're going to have to do now is just give it a quick tidy up. I do need to dress up a couple of the welds because the bushes are actually going to sit on that weld. So I just want to flatten that off. Then we're just going to give it a quick tidy up and give it a quick paint so it doesn't rust. Being in Australia, we don't really have a lot of rust issues with that sort of thing anyway, but I do want to make sure that it's as well protected as possible. So give it a tidy up and keep on going. And this is where you bash your brand new bushes in with a hammer. Don't use that bit. Well, we've got a fair few things done on the IS600 again today. Pretty stoked with the diff going together the way it did. There was really zero issues with that. We were lucky in that we didn't have to shim it left or right. It went straight in as it was. The preload was pretty much the same as it was as well before, so pretty happy with how that went together. The diff bushes were nice and simple, and I'm really stoked that we got to be able to repair that subframe while the diff was out, because actually looking at it, the way that broke was because the control arms were basically flexing in and out, and adding a lot more material to that subframe in places that we could today is obviously going to make that a lot stronger going forward, and way stronger than it was factory. Obviously where I cut it, probably looking at it now, wasn't the best place to actually cut it, and we could have actually looked at different options at the time, but at the time I didn't really think anything of it, and kind of got a little bit chop happy, but yeah, it all works pretty well now. Massive thank you to the guys at Golby's. We got the Serial 9 and the Cusco Diff parts from those guys, so yeah, massive thanks to them. They've been supporting the channel for a while now, just getting bits and pieces off them. A lot of the Toyota specific stuff you guys are seeing us use have been coming from them, so yeah, shout out again to Golby's. If you've guys got a comment or a question about today's episode or a suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.